Some places aren't meant to be touched, some darkness is meant to stay buried, and some stories, once started, refuse to end. The summer I turned 17, my father, Silas, announced we were embarking on an odyssey. Not a vacation, he stressed, but a pilgrimage. A return to the primordial self, he called it, and his eyes, usually so practical, held a glint of almost feverish zeal. Silas was no ex-military man, no survivalist guru, but a quiet cartographer who had spent years poring over antique maps and obscure journals, searching not for new lands but for forgotten ones. He spoke of the Yukon Basin with a reverence that bordered on obsession, hinting at places untouched where the very rock held ancient secrets. He believed that modern man had lost his way, softened by the artificial comforts of concrete and commerce. This trip, he declared, would strip away that artifice, leaving only raw existence. I was at that age where paternal pronouncements were met with a mixture of dutiful nods and internal eye rolls. The idea of 2 months in the Alaskan interior, miles from any hint of humanity, was daunting, yes, but also held a romantic appeal. My father described it as an immersion, a communion with the last true wild. I imagined rugged peaks, crystalline rivers, perhaps a moose or a bear from a safe distance. I certainly didn't imagine the chilling reality that would unfold, nor the true nature of the wilderness Silas sought, or the secret he harbored beneath his calm exterior. Our journey began with a grinding train ride up the Pacific coast, the rhythm of the rails a diminishing heartbeat of civilization. Each click-clack of the wheels took us further from the familiar, deeper into the vastness. Seattle was a blurred memory, then a prop plane lifted us over a sea of jagged, snow-capped teeth that tore at the sky for hours, their silent majesty both inspiring and terrifying. Finally, a tiny bush plane, its single engine buzzing like an angry hornet, deposited us on a remote gravel strip that barely qualified as a runway. The air, crisp and pine-scented, tasted different here, sharper, wilder. A weather-beaten local with eyes that seemed to have seen too much picked us up in a battered pickup truck, taking us the last few miles to a scattering of log cabins, a trading post, and a single, silent saloon. It was less a village and more a punctuation mark at the end of the known world. I stood on that dusty road, dwarfed by the towering spruce and fir, the immense, untamed wilderness pressing in from all sides. A strange quiet hung in the air, a silence so profound it hummed, occasionally broken by the rustle of unseen things in the distance. This was it, the true departure, Silas, with a homemade map clutched in his hand, a parchment piece adorned with faded ink and cryptic symbols, led us deeper. We plunged into the dense forest, the ancient trees swallowing the last echo of the bush plane's engine. Our heavy packs, laden with gear, dug into our shoulders. Silas navigated with an almost supernatural instinct, following what appeared to be an old animal trail, but one that seemed too deliberately winding, too perfect a path for mere beasts. We climbed rugged slopes, picked our way through thickets, sweat stinging my eyes. Silas, though, was in his element. He breathed deep, his chest expanding with each inhale, his eyes alight as he pointed out obscure mosses and the faint, almost indistinguishable tracks of creatures I'd never heard of. I meanwhile just tried not to twist an ankle, my mind already weary hours blurred into an exhausting ascent, the trail winding higher into the forested foothills. Just as my legs threatened to give out, we reached a small clearing along a rushing glacial river. "Here," Silas declared, his voice ringing with satisfaction as he dropped his pack, "the heart of it." I gratefully shrugged off my own burden, gulping water from the frigid stream. The air was colder here, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic and sharp, like ancient stone. After a short break, we set to work. Silas directed me to gather fallen logs for a crude shelter while he assembled our canvas tent and built a meticulous fire pit. By the time the first stars pierced the twilight, a meager camp had taken shape. We wolfed down rehydrated beans and rice, watching the jagged silhouettes of the mountains swallow the last light. My body screamed for rest, but Silas seemed energized, his gaze fixed on the dazzling canopy of stars. As I drifted off, he remained outside, a silent, watchful figure, a sentinel against the vast, unknown night. The next morning, Silas was already up, stoking the fire. "Time for education, Kalen," he said, his eyes bright. He taught me how to set snares, not just for food, but with an almost ritualistic precision. He showed me how to prep game, not just to eat, but to honor. He taught me to tan hides, to filter water, to forage for edibles, his lessons punctuated with almost mystical pronouncements about the land providing. My city hands fumbled, but I tried to absorb it all. He also gave me lessons in tracking not just animals, but patterns, anomalies. He taught me how to read the weather, how to identify different tree barks, and how to avoid bears, though his animated lectures seemed to gloss over real dangers in favor of a deeper, more esoteric understanding of the wilderness. He was in his element. I was utterly out of mine, and a growing frustration gnawed at me as the days bled into weeks. My body ached from the endless tasks hauling wood, smoking fish, mending torn gear. My fingers were calloused, my skin perpetually grimy. Silas insisted it was forging me, shaping me into something stronger, but cold, hungry, and bone-tired. I often felt like a lost small boy. Yet I persevered, not wanting to disappoint the fierce hope I saw in my father's eyes, a hope that felt less about bonding and more about some profound, hidden quest. Then came the first sign that something was truly amiss. One morning we woke to find our cache of smoked salmon carefully suspended high in a tree, ravaged. Giant paw prints, unnervingly large, surrounded the shredded remains. Grisly, Silas surmised, his tone calm, but I saw the flicker of something else in his eyes, a deeper concern. It wasn't just a bear, I sensed, but something that had found us, something that had known exactly where to look. We redoubled our precautions, suspending food even higher, stringing bells and noisemakers around the camp. A week later, the intruder returned. I heard Silas's curses before I even poked my head from the tent. Our food bags and cooler lay in a heap, contents scattered, the aluminum cooler lid bent and torn open. Silas's face was grim, a fury that was almost cold as he examined the footprints. They were enormous, vaguely human-like, but with an extra vestigial toe that pressed deep into the mud. My blood ran cold. This was no ordinary bear. Some massive, intelligent creature was roaming just beyond the tree line, watching us. Silas squeezed my shoulder, telling me not to worry, that he would protect us, but his jaw stayed clenched all day as he paced the perimeter of the camp, his rifle close at hand. That night's sleep was impossible. My mind conjured images of the creature lurking, waiting. A primal sense whispered that this was not just an animal, but something else, something ancient and malevolent, something Silas seemed to recognize, even expect. As exhaustion finally claimed me near dawn, I heard the soft click of Silas cleaning his rifle outside the tent, a sound that paradoxically offered no comfort. The next morning, I woke feeling groggy and chilled to the bone. Sunlight filtered through the tent roof, an impossible sight. Silas should have woken me hours ago. I scrambled out, yelling for him, my voice cracking. The camp was eerily silent. I searched every inch but found only his rifle leaning against a tree, its stock still damp with dew. My heart sank. I was alone. Something terrible had happened while I slept. "Dad!" I screamed desperately into the forest until my voice was raw, but only the wind answered. Then I saw them, the monstrous footprints surrounding my tent, far bigger than any man's, bearing that same unnatural extra toe. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sprinted blindly between the trees. Calling for Silas. It had been 2 days since my father mysteriously vanished from our camp, swallowed by the immense Alaskan wilderness. I knew I had to act fast if I had any hope of finding him alive. Despite having no trail to follow and my scant, clumsily learned survival skills, I plunged recklessly into the sprawling forest. Low-hanging branches whipped my face and arms as I crashed through the underbrush, desperate shouts of, "Dad, can you hear me?" swallowed by the deafening silence of the woods. I slowed, gasping for breath, my hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. "Get it together, Kalen," I told myself. "Freaking out won't save him." I forced myself to stop, to listen. Perhaps he was yelling for help somewhere nearby, but all I heard was the wind rustling through the ancient trees, a sound that suddenly felt alive, watchful. "Think," I urged myself. I tried to recall any of Silas's tracking tips, look for broken twigs, disturbed soil, anything that seemed out of place. I scanned the ground, my eyes burning, desperate for a sign he had passed this way. At first there was nothing but a chaotic tapestry of leaf litter and fungi. Then a faint boot print, clear in a patch of mud. It was headed downstream towards a small creek. Hope, fragile but fierce, surged through me. I hurried to follow the trail, more prints appearing periodically along the creek's mossy banks. My pace quickened, my gaze fixed on the ground, searching for any other clues. Crossing the icy creek made the trail vanish momentarily, the water obliterating the prints, but then I spotted it. A scrap of Silas's red flannel shirt snagged on a fallen log, its familiar plaid a beacon in the green. I must be close. "Hold on, Dad, I'm coming." I yelled, my voice echoing off the rocks. I was halfway up the side of a ravine now, following the creek higher into the hills. My thighs burned and I slipped off and on the damp leaves, but I couldn't slow down. I had to find him today, or I shook off the thought, calling his name again. Maybe this time he would answer. But only the piercing shriek of a hawk replied, a sound that felt more like a warning than a greeting. I kept climbing until I reached a tumbling waterfall, spilling into a clear, dark pool. Spray misted my face as I stopped to scan the area. Hands cupped around my mouth. Can you hear me, Dad? Why wouldn't he respond? Was he? No, he has to be okay. The trail seemed to disappear by the waterfall, lost in the slick rock face. I frantically looked around, my mind racing, desperate for where to go next. Then I noticed a rocky outcrop jutting above the pool. Was that a handprint? I edged out along the outcrop to examine it. Yes, a muddy handprint, Silas's for sure. He must have climbed up this ledge. With renewed motivation, I inched around the falls and up the slick, moss-covered rocks. Don't look down, I told myself, focusing on any potential handholds. I reached a small plateau finally, where I could rest a minute. No more signs of Silas, but I must be gaining on him. Catching my breath, I gazed across the ravine to the opposite ridge. Something caught my eye near the tree line. Was that Silas waving his arms? I see you, I yelled, excitement making my voice crack, but he didn't react, just kept waving erratically, almost unnaturally. I shaded my eyes, studying this strange, jerking movement. Was that even a person or some swaying branches, a cruel trick of the light? Cold disappointment washed over me. It had to be a mirage, my mind playing cruel jokes. Despair overwhelmed me, and I realized I'd lost the trail and wasted precious time chasing phantoms. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks. I just wanted to curl up on the rocks and give up, but I couldn't let Silas down. He'd keep searching relentlessly if it were me lost out here. Wiping my eyes, I resolved to keep going, even though I was reaching my physical limits. I managed to inch my way back around the falls and continue downstream, looking for any subtle signs of passage. The day was fading, but I wouldn't let darkness stop this search. I just hoped I was going in the right direction. My range of vision narrowed as the sun sank below the ridge line. I kept my eyes glued to the ground, terrified of missing some vital clue in the growing gloom. Would Silas survive another frigid night out here alone? I was so focused on searching for tracks that I didn't see the fallen log spanning the creek up ahead. My shin cracked against it painfully, sending me sprawling into the icy water. The current tugged at my clothes as I struggled to stand, jagged rocks slicing my hands as I crawled back to shore. Exhausted, I collapsed on the muddy bank. Through chattering teeth, I scanned the darkening woods, praying Silas would suddenly emerge, but I knew that was just a fantasy. He was still lost out there, and now so was I, and I was in no shape to keep going. Utterly defeated, I dragged myself back up the trail, using trees for support. My soaked clothes clung coldly as night fell and temperatures dropped. I kept blacking out and stumbling, but finally I made out the faint glow of our campfire through the trees. Somehow I had wandered in a giant circle today. Silas was still nowhere to be found. I sank down by the flames, every fiber of me screaming in pain and sorrow, but I couldn't give up. At dawn's first light, I would search again. The warmth from the crackling flames slowly revived my battered body. As I sat there, wrapped in a blanket, I methodically cleaned and dressed my many cuts using the first aid kit. Spraining my ankle crossing that creek earlier didn't help matters, but I just gritted my teeth and tightly wrapped it with an ace bandage. Once I'd patched myself up, I gingerly hobbled around camp, taking stock of our remaining supplies. The situation wasn't promising. Silas's absence meant it was all up to me now to provide food, mend damaged gear, and maintain the fire. Can I survive solo out here? Doubt and despair crept back in as I surveyed our meager camp, but moping wouldn't make Silas magically reappear. I shoved the fears aside and focused on tasks that might boost my chances. Gathering firewood, preparing some trout I'd caught earlier, and refilling our water stores. Keeping busy steadied my nerves and boosted my morale a little, but it still felt like I was just biding time until Silas came hiking back into view. Please let it be soon. The fish helped strengthen and warm me after that brutal day of hiking. As I gnawed the last fatty morsels off the bone, I thought of Silas, still out there, hungry and shivering. Was he managing to find any food or shelter? Is he? No, can't go down that road. Have to stay positive. He's alive. I tossed the picked bones into the fire. Sparks danced up towards the stars, which glowed brightly in the crisp night sky. Then I heard it. The long, lonely howl of a wolf echoed across the valley. Something about its mournful cry sent a chill down my spine. It was answered by another wolf, closer this time. I instinctively scooted near the flames, stoking them with a stick. I knew wolves usually avoided humans, but being alone now, I couldn't help feeling scared. More howls joined in, all around, making the forest seem to close in on me. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. In the morning I'll search again, no matter what. If the wolves find Dad first, no, I can't think about that. He only had a day head start, so he can't be far. As the moon rose overhead, I stared into the swirling flames, imagining they were a campfire keeping Silas warm somewhere out there. Today was another long, difficult day with no sign of Silas. My ankle throbbed, my back ached, and my morale was sinking steadily, but I had to keep trying. I held on to the slim hope that maybe he left clues or signs for me in our traps. As I checked each empty snare along the trail, my heart sank more. Then I arrived at the final snare near the creek and saw the rabbit I'd caught yesterday was gone. Hope flickered back to life. Silas must have taken it to survive another day. He had to be here. My eyes scoured the area, looking for any other evidence he passed by. "I'm on the right track," I yelled out excitedly. "Just hang on, Dad, I'm going to find you." I gathered the scattered branches of the disassembled trap, wanting to be methodical and not miss anything. As I was rebuilding it, I noticed some scratched marks on a tree trunk. I rushed over to inspect them. Is it a message from Silas? I ran my fingers over the rough letters carved into the bark that spelled DAD. Yes, it has to be a sign left for me. My heart swelled, knowing I was on the right path. I just had to keep following it along the creek. The morning sun filtered through the trees as I stirred awake, my body stiff and sore from another night sleeping on the hard ground. As I poked at the dying campfire and began boiling water for my morning tea, a thin tendril of smoke on the distant ridge caught my eye. I froze, kettle in hand, and stared at the gray smoke wisping above the treetops. There was no mistaking it for a natural forest fire with the way it billowed in contained puffs, as if someone was sending a smoke signal. But who could be out here signaling in the remote wilderness besides Silas? My heart leaped. It had to be him. Hands shaking with adrenaline, I scrambled to pack up a small day bag with some supplies. I doused the fire and slopped some more tea into my thermos before hurriedly setting out toward the smoke. As I crashed through the underbrush, I shouted anxiously, "Don't worry, Dad, I'm coming." The smoke looked several miles away across rugged terrain, but I was determined to reach it as fast as possible. I clambered up steep wooded slopes, then cautiously picked my way down loose shale on the other side. Heavy branches whipped across my face as I forced my way through thickets choked with alder and devil's club. I slipped off and on the damp tundra, but kept staggering onward. That column of smoke was my only tether of hope that Silas was still alive out here somewhere. As the day wore on, however, the smoke started dissipating against the dreary gray sky. I panicked, quickening my aching pace as much as possible. But by the time I reached the ridge where it originated, there was nothing left but a faint whiff of burnt wood. "No, no, no," I cried in anguish, frantically searching the area for any other sign of Silas. But the ground showed no footprints, no fresh campfire remains, just flattened grass where perhaps someone had been signaling hours ago. Exhausted and heartsick, I collapsed to my knees. It was like losing Silas all over again. He must have given up waiting and moved on, and now I'd wasted precious daylight chasing smoke through the wilderness. As tears stung my eyes, it really sank in how utterly alone I was out here. If I didn't find Silas soon, I shook off that thought. I couldn't let hopelessness take root, or I'd be as good as dead. I had to keep believing we'd be reunited. Wiping my eyes, I gathered my resolve and took one last look around. Maybe Silas left some clue about where he was heading. I noticed a faint game trail winding down the backside of the ridge. That could be a good starting point tomorrow. But for now, I needed to get back to my camp before nightfall. The hike back seemed to take twice as long, exhausted as I was. I slipped often on the damp moss and tangled roots, too weary to stop again. I sipped cold tea and chewed jerky as I walked, replaying the morning's disappointment in my head. Where do I search next? Will Silas leave another signal for me, or will the creature hunting him snuff his life out first? By the time my small campfire came into view, it was nearly dark. I numbly kicked together a fire, too tired for dinner. As I huddled close to the flames, fighting off despair about my vanishing father, the surrounding woods suddenly erupted in chilling howls. Wolves! It was going to be another long, sleepless night. The next morning, I was shaken awake at sunrise by a horrific scream echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. I lurched up, heart hammering. The anguished screaming went on, then was abruptly silenced. Every hair on my body stood on end. That sounded like a human in mortal agony. Could it be Silas? What if he's being attacked right now? I grabbed my knife and scrambled from the tent toward the awful sounds. "Dad, I'm coming," I shouted as I sprinted recklessly through the trees. With no trail to follow, my mad dash through the forest carried me up a wooded ravine, driven on by adrenaline and terror at what I might discover. As I crested a hill, the trees opened up, revealing a small clearing nestled between the ridges. I was met with a gruesome sight that stopped me dead in my tracks. A huge pit had been dug in the middle of the clearing, roughly 15 feet wide, its dirt sides plunging 10 feet down to a floor bristling with sharpened wooden stakes and animal bones. It was unmistakably a primitive trap, built to capture and kill. Could this be responsible for the agonized screaming I heard earlier? My instincts screamed at me to run from this evil place, but I had to know if this was the creature's lair that took Silas. I crept slowly along the pit's grassy edge, peering down apprehensively. The wooden spikes were caked in dried blood, tufts of torn clothing and fur clung to them as well. And was that a human skull grinning up at me from atop a stake? I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. What kind of sadistic monster are we dealing with? As I stood shaking at the edge of the barbaric trap, the screams echoed through my mind again. Maybe Silas stumbled right into this clearing too, and met his end impaled in the pit, crying out his last breaths. At that gruesome thought, my knees nearly gave out. I squeezed my eyes shut, mouthing a silent prayer that isn't how Silas died. Drawing a shaky breath, I forced myself to turn away from the pit and keep moving. I had to find him, or what's left of him. Still reeling from the discoveries in the trap-lined clearing, I scrambled back into the trees, just wanting to put distance between me and that horrific pit. As I ran, the forest suddenly rang out with more agonized screaming just ahead. Could it be survivors of the pit trap or new victims? I crashed through the underbrush toward the screams. They turned to chilling gurgles that made my skin crawl, then silence again. I was getting close now, my own panicked breathing and snapping twigs drowned out only by my pounding heartbeat. Bursting into another small clearing, I gasped at the sight before me. A massive elk lay sprawled on its side, throat torn out and belly gutted, its glassy eyes stared at nothing. Splashes of blood drenched the grass around it. I immediately understood. This poor animal's cries were what I heard. It must have escaped an attack only to come die here. But what killed it? I circled the elk wearily, taking in the deep slashes in the side of its body. Some creature with huge claws and monstrous strength did this. As I examined the elk's wounds, I felt eyes upon me. I froze, sensing something lurking just out of sight. Moving slowly, I drew my knife from its sheath. My mind screamed at me to run, but I had to know what was here. "Is it the creature that took Silas? Come out and face me," I yelled into the trees, sounding braver than I felt. In response, a flock of ravens burst from the branches, cawing loudly. I spun toward the commotion, nearly jumping from my skin, but it was just birds taking flight, not the beast, for now at least. It was still out there, hunter and hunting, and it was clear I was in over my head against this predator still wary of whatever killed this deer nearby. I approached it slowly, knife poised to strike. As I reached the elk's body, I spotted the massive footprints pressed into the bloody earth around it. I crouched down to inspect one more closely. The track had a vaguely human shape, but dwarfed any man's foot, nearly 18 inches long from heel to toe, with that disturbing malformed extra digit clearly visible. The depth and spacing between prints indicated something extremely heavy made them, crunching effortlessly through sticks and underbrush. What primordial nightmare could leave signs this huge? The Arctic chill gripped my spine again, despite the warm day. I followed the tracks a few yards into the bush. They led to an area of flattened grass, where it appeared the creature had dragged the elk carcass back to feast on it. I dug around in the depressed grass and unearthed chunks of loose fur and flesh, likely discarded by the beast. I held my breath against the raw stench. Clearly, I was dealing with no ordinary animal here, and I was certain now it was the same creature that raided our camp and stole Silas away. Could he still be alive as its captive somehow? The possibility fueled a tiny shred of hope in me, but how could I possibly rescue him from such a powerful, ruthless monster? As I pondered my bleak chances, a raven landed on the elk carcass and began tearing greedily at its tongue. I swatted it away, which startled nearby crows into a loud wing-flapping frenzy. Leaving the mutilated elk behind, I pressed on through the forest, following the ominous footprints. They led me over a gurgling stream and up a mossy embankment. I emerged from the trees into another small clearing littered with the remnants of what was once a campsite. Tattered canvas tent scraps hung from broken poles. Shredded clothes were strewn about, along with some empty cans of beans and boots with the toes ripped out. It looked like someone or some group had a camp here that met a violent end. Could these scraps belong to past victims of the creature? I rummaged through the ruins, looking for any clues, but found nothing of use. Everything had been torn apart in apparent rage long ago. As I was crouched by the long cold fire pit, something shiny half buried in the dirt caught my eye. I dug it out. It was a woman's silver locket, still smooth despite years of exposure. My thumb brushed away the grime clouding its surface. Engraved on the front were the letters a +J who did this belong to. I fastened the locket around my own neck for safekeeping, saying a quick prayer for its unknown owner, AJ, whose last moments here must have been utterly terrifying. I picked through the camp remains a bit longer, but it seemed the only story to glean was one of unimaginable carnage. These poor souls likely crossed paths with the formidable creature, and it did not end well for them. I hoped for better fortune finding Silas, if he remained alive to be found. The creature's tracks wove deeper into the woods beyond the ravaged campsite. With growing dread, I continued following them until the large prints veered off toward a massive, old-growth spruce. Beneath its sprawling branches sat the cold remains of another campfire, recently burned out. I approached cautiously, already fearing what I'd find. My heart dropped into my stomach when I spotted the tattered plaid shirt discarded next to the fire. It was Silas's. He'd been wearing it the morning he disappeared. I picked it up with trembling hands. The back was shredded and caked in dried blood, but it wasn't just shredded. The shirt had been laid out, almost arranged, the ruined fabric fanned out like some grotesque display. And the scent, not just blood and decay, but something else. Something cold and ancient, like deep earth and iron. A smell that clung to the fabric collapsing to my knees. I clutched the ruined shirt tightly and bowed my head. I came all this way, clinging to a thin hope that Silas might still be alive, but this grisly evidence extinguished that last flicker. He must have stopped here to rest and build a fire, only to be savagely attacked without warning, like all the other hapless people whose paths crossed with this monster. I squeezed my eyes shut, hot tears spilling down my cheeks. Silas is really gone. The jarring reality sank through me, leaving only numbness behind. What do I do now? Wander the wilderness solo until the creature comes for me too? The cold indifference of the Alaskan forest threatened to swallow me, but then that numbness turned to hot anger. Silas didn't deserve this horrific fate. No one did. If I can't save him, I can at least avenge him and make sure the beast that killed him harms no one else ever again. I roughly smeared the tears from my face and stood, turning to follow the tracks again with renewed, raging purpose. This ends now seeing the bloody, arranged shreds of Silas's shirt extinguished the last flicker of hope I'd been cradling that he was somehow still alive. Kneeling on the cold ground next to the abandoned campfire, I clutched his ruined shirt tightly in my fists and let the crushing anguish wash over me. "No, please God, no," I sobbed, hot tears spilling down my cheeks. I knew Silas was likely gone the minute I saw those giant footprints leaving our camp, but some irrational part of me still clung to the belief that I'd find him out here somehow, maybe wounded but alive. Now only his bloodied scraps remained, ripped from his body by unseen claws and teeth. The proof was undeniable. Silas was dead. The beast dragged him from our camp and slaughtered him like prey. I was sleeping just yards away, obliviously dreaming while that monster tore him apart. Blinding guilt mixed with piercing grief. I should have done something, somehow stopped this horrible fate that Silas didn't deserve. He only wanted to bond with me over a camping trip, and it led him to a violent, solitary death so far from home. I yearned to scream my anguish at the indifferent Alaskan sky, but I knew it would only echo unheard through the endless trees. Silas is gone, and he's never coming back. I'm alone in the wild now, so far over my head against a powerful predator. But as I knelt, rocking back and forth, mourning my father, grief slowly morphed into rage, red-hot and simmering. I will make this creature pay. If it's the last thing I ever do. It brutally killed my father, the only family I had left. Now I have nothing to lose in destroying it or perishing in the attempt. I roughly wiped away my tears, still clutching Silas's tattered shirt in my fist. As the red-hot rage coursed through me, eclipsing the anguish, I hardened my resolve. This creature will pay dearly for killing my father. I'll make certain of it. No more cowering like prey for me now. I stalked back to the abandoned campsite and scoured the ruins for anything I could use as a weapon. In a torn pack, I found a hatchet with a chipped but still deadly blade. I picked up a Bowie knife from the dirt too, and felt the familiar weight of it in my hand. Together with my own hunting knife, I was armed and ready to hunt the hunter. Near the trampled tents was a battered wooden box with EXBLOSIVES stamped on the side in faded letters. Inside lay coiled fuse wire and sticks of TNT in crumbling paper wrappers. Looks like salvage from the miners who must have camped here long ago. I grinned wickedly, perfect for baiting some traps. I packed up the hatchet, dynamite, and all the wire I could salvage. As an afterthought, I grabbed an empty glass bottle too, the neck still jagged where it was broken. Luring this beast will take every weapon and dirty trick I've got. For you, Dad, I whispered as I shouldered the supplies, turning to follow the monster's path back into the trees. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for my confrontation with the creature that killed Silas. Using the hatchet and knives, I sharpened the edges of fallen saplings into spears and posts. These I drove into the earth in a tight cluster, then strategically draped the area with foliage to disguise it as a punji trap. Nearby, I assembled a deadfall trap with heavy logs propped precariously over a tripwire. Camouflaged pits, lined with stakes, surrounded the clearing where I assembled my traps. Each one I baited with chunks of elk meat, left to attract the creature with scent. No matter where it enters this area, it'll meet an unpleasant surprise. Now to set the final lure. I punctured small holes in the glass bottle sides, then stuffed the old TNT sticks inside, feeling the destructive power in my hands. This will make a hell of a diversionary explosion when I need it. I found a high rocky ledge overlooking the network of traps and wired the bottle with a long fuse I could light from cover and safety. As the sky reddened with sunset, I finished assembling my ambush and then retreated a good distance to my hidden overlook. Soon, the crickets and nighthawks began their dusk songs. My heart pounded with adrenaline, eager for the fight ahead. That monster deserves a slow, agonizing end for what it did. As night fell, I sat sharpening my blades, ready to avenge Silas that night. I was awoken by a trap snapping shut on something. I must have dozed off for a bit despite the adrenaline, because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake to the sound of crunching branches and squealing echoing up from the forest below. I blinked the grogginess away and spotted a dark shape thrashing in my punji pit below, the sapling spears digging into it. Yes, my trap worked. I lit my makeshift explosives fuse from the ledge, then scrambled down an access trail I'd left myself. The twisted cries coming from the pit were awful, but welcome. As I reached the edge, I bore witness to the horror trapped below. A massive grizzly was impaled at all angles by the spears, tearing itself into worse wounds trying to break free. Dark blood matted its fur as its roars turned to pathetic whimpers. I left the dying grizzly caught in my trap. It wasn't the creature I was hunting. As I crept back through the moonlight woods, I held my makeshift torch aloft, casting flickering light and shadow across the trees. My feet avoided dry twigs as I approached the area I'd left baited and rigged. Was the predator here, stalking its prey? My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the stealthy steps tracking me in return. I wheeled around frequently, brandishing my torch and knife against the darkened forest, but always nothing was there until the hairs on my neck stood up, sensing the eyes upon me once more. Something smart and deadly was toying with me, keeping its distance. But it wouldn't for long. I just needed to draw it fully into my web. When I reached the bait pile, left untouched, I realized my plan had failed. That beast didn't take my offering and now knew to avoid this area. Cursing under my breath, I crept back toward my distant camp, defeated for tonight but not broken. Just as the flame died, two glowing eyes appeared inches from my face. My torch winked out just as I emerged into a moonlit clearing halfway back to camp. I paused, struggling to see in the pale moonlight. As my vision adjusted, I detected a shift in the darkness. Two small orbs seemed to float at the tree line, reflecting the weak light unnaturally. I stared, trying to make sense of this phenomenon. Then it hit me. Those were eyes. I backed up slowly, every sense screaming danger. The eyes advanced from the shadows, low to the ground and blazing red with a malevolent intelligence no beast possesses. A massive shape began taking form, easily 9 feet tall and as broad as a bear. An awful, ancient odor overtook the scene, issuing from matted fur covering impossibly large limbs and torso. I spotted jagged claws and teeth glinting in the moonlight as the creature stepped fully into view. Every instinct in me shrieked to run, but I stood frozen in primal terror. This was the predator that took Silas from our camp, I was sure of it, but nothing could have prepared me for something so huge, so monstrous, so wrong. I should flee into the night, yet I was paralyzed by those devilish glowing eyes, piercing my soul. Death had tracked me down to play its wicked games for a while, and I knew I was utterly, hopelessly outmatched here in this dark forest. The towering beast was upon me in an instant, moving with shocking speed for its size. Its massive hand clamped down on my shoulder, talons digging painfully into my flesh. I was lifted off my feet like a rag doll and flung backwards with tremendous force. My back and head cracked against the unyielding tree trunk, exploding my vision into a shower of sparks. As I slumped to the ground, clinging to consciousness by a shred, I watched helplessly as the blurred shape of the creature loomed over me. I tried to scramble away on all fours, but my limbs had turned to jelly. The blow to my head clouded everything in a dizzy haze. The monster reached down and seized me by the shirt collar, yanking me up like I weighed nothing. Fetid breath blasted my face as it roared triumphantly, making my ears ring. Those glowing red eyes bored into mine with primal hunger and hate as its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. This is it, a monster food. As the beast pulled me towards its salivating maw, razor-sharp claws poised to tear me apart, my senses finally collapsed into blackness. Everything went numb, and I was swallowed up by the void. Cold, damp, and stale air was the first sensation as I regained consciousness. It filled my nostrils and mouth with its tomb-like essence. My throbbing head pulsed in time to my heartbeat as I forced my leaden eyelids open. Inky darkness pressed in from all sides. I tried to blink away the blackness, but it stubbornly remained. Where am I? As feeling slowly returned to my limbs, I shifted slightly and heard the rattle of chains. The icy bite of metal encircled my left ankle. I was shackled in this lightless place, wherever it may be. Fear rippled through me as blurred memories returned of being ambushed by that beast and thrown against a tree with terrific force. It must have dragged me to its lair while I was out cold. But where and why am I still alive? I swept my hands over the cold, damp floor around me. My fingers encountered smooth, rounded objects that seemed to be bones, human bones, from the size. Lots of them. Skulls, ribs, femurs. My breath quickened. Oh God, this is a mass grave. I recoiled in fresh horror, only to brush against another mound of remains behind me. I was completely surrounded by a grisly trove of gnawed skeletons. Full panic set in. I lurched against the chain manacling my leg, but it only bit deeper. "Help!" I screamed into the silent darkness. "Get me out of here!" But my pleas went unanswered, echoing down unknown corridors. Rocking back and forth, I closed my eyes and prayed this was just a nightmare I'd wake from soon. But nightmares don't generally come with pain, and the throbbing in my head reminded me this was all too real. Time lost all meaning in this place. Had it been hours or days since I awoke chained in this tomb, starvation and thirst were setting in, bringing constant headaches and dizziness. When my end would come in this hellhole, I didn't know, but then I heard something, a shuffling in the dark. Clawed feet dragging a heavy object across the stone. My blood turned to ice. I pressed against the cave wall, willing myself invisible as the shambling footsteps drew closer, accompanied by the skittering of loose pebbles. I held my breath, heart jackhammering against my ribs. A guttural snort echoed from just yards away as I finally detected the outline of my monstrous captor emerging from the blackness. It dragged the carcass of a massive elk, leaving a trail of blood. By the meager light reflecting in its eyes, I watched the hulking beast settle beside its fresh kill and tear ravenously into the elk's belly with savage fangs and claws. Strings of gore sprayed the cave floor as it feasted. Hot, metallic-scented blood splashed my face and arms, mixing with a cold sweat of terror. The gruesome sight made my mind reel. I should be dead like this elk. Why had the beast kept me alive, if not to toy sadistically with me first? Eyes squeezed shut, I silently prayed for courage I didn't possess or the mercy of a quick death. I studied it, looking for any weakness I could exploit for escape. The sounds of the feast dragged on for what seemed like an eternity. Bones cracking, meat tearing, the monster's guttural grunts of satisfaction. I didn't dare open my eyes again until the sounds tapered off. A heavy thump told me the beast had flung aside what remained of its meal. I risked a tiny glance and saw it sprawled on its side in a stupor, bulging stomach exposed. Now may be my only chance. Hardly daring to breathe, I observed every inch of the creature from the relative safety of the shadows. Even sitting, it loomed enormous, at least 9 feet tall, probably over 500 pounds. Matted, wiry fur covered its ape-like frame. The head was the most monstrous part, flat nose, jutting brow, mouth full of jagged fangs capable of crushing bone. Overall, it looked like the warped offspring of a prehistoric man and bear. My search found no obvious physical weakness. Its proportions appeared thickly muscled and powerful throughout. I glanced anxiously at my chained ankle. The only way to escape seemed to be unlocking this or slipping the foot out. But I'd need a plan for when it wakes. For now, I'll keep studying it for any opening to exploit, any small advantage that might change the odds from impossible to merely suicidal. The creature had trudged off down one of the adjoining cavern tunnels, leaving me alone again. But there was no telling when it would return. Now was likely my only chance to attempt escape. I strained at the heavy shackle until veins bulged along my forehead, but the metal only cut deeper into my raw, bleeding ankle. The chain remained anchored firmly to a metal spike driven deep in the rock. Desperate, I searched the pile of bones surrounding me, looking for anything small and rigid to pick the lock. Finding a splintered femur, I jammed it into the keyhole and worked furiously. After minutes of probing and twisting, there was still no give. My frustration mounted as the femur fragment kept snapping and crumbling in the lock. Spitting curses, I searched for wire or a slim piece of metal among the victim's remains, maybe jewelry that could trip the mechanism, but I found nothing usable. Only more fragments of broken bone. Defeated, I slammed my fists against the unyielding cave floor until they were torn and bloodied. Rage brewing inside, I grabbed a rock and began smashing it against the spike pinning my chain, but it was driven in at least 6 inches and barely budged against my weakened blows. Breath heaving, I collapsed back against the wall, glancing at the tunnel where the beast departed. My blood turned colder imagining it could return at any second. I had failed, and my hope dimmed along with the chance of escape as I despairingly examined my raw, ruined hands by touch in the pitch blackness. A faint noise in the distance made my ears prick up. It almost sounded like a voice. I held my breath and listened intently until it came again, a ragged cry of pain from somewhere far down one of the adjoining tunnels. Could it be Sila's, somehow alive and trapped here too? "Dad, is that you?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice breaking. No response, but after a moment, another pained yell echoed back, weaker this time. It was unmistakably my father's voice. He must be shackled in a distant cavern, crying out in agony. The beast seemed to be slowly torturing him for its own sick amusement. "Just hold on, Dad, I'm going to get us out of here," I yelled desperately down the stone corridor. Hearing him suffering so nearby was too much to bear. I clawed and pried with renewed frenzy at the spike pinning my chain, ignoring the hot blood now slicking both hands. "That monster is hurting my dad. I have to get—" Silas's screams went quiet again, leaving only deafening silence. Sobbing in anguish and fury, I kept tearing at the unbreakable bonds tethering me, heedless of broken nails and mangled fingers. I cried out promises of rescue, though he likely couldn't hear now. Holding on to hope was all I could do. I clawed desperately at the loose rocks and hard-packed earth around the metal spike, trying to dig it out. My broken and bloody fingernails left deep gouges in the unyielding cave floor, but no matter how much grit I scraped away, the spike remained lodged fast in the rock. Exhausted and frantic, I chipped away at the metal bolt itself with a sharp stone, hoping to weaken or snap it, but with my awkward angle and clumsy grip, I barely scratched the surface. All I accomplished was flaying the skin from my fingers and palms until they were shredded and oozing red. I ignored the searing pain and kept digging relentlessly. I had to get free before that beast returns. But by now I was dripping blood and gritty with sweat and grime. Still, the chains wouldn't budge an inch. Anguish and frustration rose in my throat as I slumped back, staring down at my ruined hands. Blood steadily dripped from my mangled fingertips as the shackle continued to bite cruelly into my ankle. No amount of raw determination can overcome this obstacle. I'm still trapped in the monster's lair. Tears leaked down my grimy cheeks as I faced reality. There's no escaping this cave on my own. I'm helpless to save either of us. All my desperate efforts have only weakened me further. Lightheaded from pain and blood loss, I slumped over, awaiting death or worse. I'm so sorry, Dad. I must have blacked out again, because the next thing I know, heavy footsteps are approaching and gravel scrapes beneath monstrous claws. I force my crusted eyes open to see two malevolent red orbs glowing in the blackness as the creature comes for me. It pauses just feet away, nostrils flaring as it smells my blood. I spot the deep furrows I clawed around the spike before passing out. The beast's eyes narrow, and it lets out a rumbling snarl, bearing jagged fangs. I try to scramble away, but I'm too weak, too woozy. The creature grabs me around the throat and heaves me up like a misbehaving pup. Hot, rank breath blasts my face, and hairy paws crush my windpipe. Spots explode across my vision as I dangle and weave for air. Just when I feel consciousness slipping away, it hurls me back to the hard ground. As I lie gasping like a landed fish, it looms over me, claw raised threateningly. I know what's coming and close my eyes. Punishment doled out by this monster will be nothing compared to what my failure has likely already cost Silas. As the first brutal blows rain down, I retreat deep within my mind, seeking solace in memories far from this eternal night. Someday the pain will end. The beating seems to last forever, until I'm barely clinging to awareness. When it finally stops, I don't dare move. Each shallow breath sends fire through my ribs. Surely the monster has beaten me to within an inch of death. This time I'll never free Silas or myself. Now, suddenly, I hear my father's screams echoing again, weaker than before. The sound reignites some primal protective fire in me. I have to try and save him, even if it means sacrificing myself. Mustering my last reserves of strength, I rasp out, "Please, stop hurting him. Take me instead." The creature pauses, head cocked. Emboldened, I raise my voice louder. "Let my father go, take me in his place." I repeat this desperate plea over and over, ready to offer my life if this evil being can understand mercy. It stares down at me for an eternity with no hint of emotion on its alien face. Then, moving deliberately, the beast reaches down, unlocks my shackle, and wrenches me up by the arm. Is it leading me to my execution? I stumble along weakly as it drags me towards Silas's screams, prepared to meet my fate if it will save him. The creature drags me stumbling through pitch-black tunnels, my head spinning with blood loss, but I don't resist, focused only on reaching Silas. We emerge into a small cavern faintly lit by a crevice overhead. I see a hunched figure chained to the far wall. He raises his head slowly, as if believing I'm only a hallucination. I lurch forward despite the monster's grip and fall at Silas's feet. We cling together, both battered and broken, weeping tears of joy and grief. After a lifetime, I lean back to look at him in the dim light. His face is swollen and bloodied, almost beyond recognition. His eyes, though, are the most disturbing. They hold a strange, vacant calm, a deep knowing peace that feels utterly alien in our horrific predicament. I can only imagine how I must appear to him in turn, but nothing matters now except that we're together again against all odds. "I was afraid I'd lost you, son," Silas says, his voice cracking, but his eyes hold that unsettling serenity. My relief is short-lived. The creature grabs me by the hair and clamps the shackle around my own ankle. I'm chained beside Silas, close enough to touch, but we remain trapped deep in the creature's lair. Chained beside my father in the cramped cavern, I felt the will to survive slowly leaving my battered body. But Silas grasped my hand fiercely in the darkness. "Don't give up hope," he whispered, his voice still, but with an underlying conviction that chilled me more than comforted. "We're getting out of this hellhole, whatever it takes. I swear I'll get you home." His firm determination ignited my fading spirit like flint to steel. I managed a weak smile despite the direness of our plight. "We'll get out together," I vowed. "I'm not leaving this cave without you." Studying our small prison, I noticed a femur bone near Silas's chained foot. One of the many remains scattered about, but this bone was thicker than the rest, with a bulky, rounded end, a weapon. Clearly, it looked like the femur of a woolly mammoth or a giant elk. I pointed it out to Silas. He tested the heft and balance of the heavy bone club, then gave me a fierce grin, the first genuine spark of hope lit in his eyes since we were reunited, though that unnerving calm remained. "It's not much," he rasped, "but it'll give that ugly bastard a wallop once we get the chance." We worked together to angle the club within his reach. Even chained, sealers should be able to swing it with brutal force when needed. We quietly celebrated this tiny advantage with our first drink of water as captives, rationing the murky drops that dripped from the ceiling. It tasted sweet, quenching our parched throats. We didn't have to wait long before heavy footsteps shook the tunnel floor, announcing the creature's return. I exchanged a meaningful look with Silas. It was time. I belly crawled to the edge of the light's perimeter, fortifying my nerves. Silas wrapped both hands around the mammoth bone, poised to strike. As the glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness, I threw a loose stone, striking its torso. The Sasquatch snarled, turning my way. I desperately scrambled back, but its focus held on me just long enough. With an enraged cry, Silas leaped up and swung the club with all his might. It connected solidly with the beast's left knee in a spray of dark blood. The leg buckled sideways with a sickening crunch. The monster's head whipped towards Silas, club raised for another blow, but quicker than seemed possible, the Sasquatch slammed him against the wall in a chokehold. My father's face paled as his chained legs flailed desperately. I screamed and clutched at the monstrous hand, trying fruitlessly to free him. It glared at me with those malevolent red eyes and tightened its grip around Silas's throat. Just as black spots swarmed my vision, there was a whistling sound and a wet thunk. The creature's snarling face went slack and the hand dropped Silas. He crumpled, gasping for breath. Behind the dazed monster, the mammoth bone club clattered to the ground. Somehow, Silas must have struck its injured knee again, sending them both toppling, and on the way down, he smashed the monster's skull with the club, crushing bone. It swayed, dark blood sheeting from its deformed head. Those demonic eyes rolled back. With a loud thud, it hit the ground. Silas staggered over, grabbing the blood-coated club. He began savagely bashing the creature's head and neck, reducing both to a pulpy ruin. I wanted to look away from the gruesome scene, but couldn't. We were both running on instinct now, survive at any cost. When only mangled meat remained above its shoulders, Silas finally stopped, breathing hard. The thing that haunted our nightmares now looked pitiful, a pile of matted fur and bones. We cut its reign of terror short in this dark cave forever, and yet our desperation remained. I couldn't tear my eyes from the sight as Silas brought the club down with crushing force on the beast's skull. There was a sick splintering sound on impact. Its legs buckled, and the Sasquatch toppled like a felled redwood, hitting the stone floor hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. For a moment it lay there, a dark, spreading puddle haloing its head. I held my breath, terrified that any second it would rise up and resume its attack with renewed fury. But the massive body remained sprawled and motionless, aside from a few awful twitches running through the limbs. Silas prodded its arm wearily with the bone club, poised to strike again. There was no response. He turned and gave me a fierce, relieved smile through the blood and grime coating his face. That strange, quiet calm still present in his eyes. I crawled over to join him, hardly able to believe our luck. Silas crushed the monster's skull with that mammoth bone, using only adrenaline and desperate strength. "Help me search it quick, before it wakes up," Silas said, rifling through the hide. We frantically combed through its fur for anything that could possibly free us from these shackles and cave. Just when hope was fading, Silas said, "Aha!" He held up a small metal pick triumphantly. I recognized it as a miner's tool for cleaning and scraping ore deposits. It just might work. Silas knelt by my chained ankle and carefully inserted the pick into the lock, delicately maneuvering the pins inside. The seconds crawled by agonizingly. I glanced anxiously between his focused face and the Sasquatch's motionless body just feet away. Finally, I heard the glorious click of the tumblers aligning. The iron cuff sprang open. My raw, chafed ankle was finally free after days of brutal confinement. I could cry from the relief. Silas made short work of his own lock, too, and helped me to my feet. The tunnel twisted and rose, and eventually fresh air kissed my face. With a final burst, we scrambled up the rocky passage on hands and knees toward that beautiful light. Together, Silas and I burst out into the open forest, gulping the free air hungrily, but we didn't stop running, knowing the nightmare was right on our heels. It had been days, maybe weeks, in that lightless underworld. Emerging battered and bedraggled, time and direction lost meaning. Silas and I slowly picked our way along the riverbank, struggling to stay upright with each agonizing step. When the terrain got too steep, we clawed up slopes on all fours like animals. Mile after mile, we pressed on, trading weak encouragement or leaning to rest in silence. The pristine river soon grew choked with outstretched roots from shoreline spruce that provided welcome handholds. An ancient bear trail, marked by claw marks, appeared along the bank, which we gratefully followed out of the craggy canyon into gentler forest foothills. Silas's energy surged when we spotted a crumbling cabin nestled ahead by the river's edge, but it was abandoned, offering only a brief break from the elements. Replenishing our strength as best we could, we set forth again downriver, now following trails that showed signs of man. I smiled for the first time in weeks when familiar smoke trails appeared above the trees ahead. Our camp. Somehow, we found our way back. It's been over 40 years now since that fateful Alaskan camping trip with my father, but even today, hardly a day goes by that I don't think back to the summer of '72 and what we endured out there in the unforgiving wilderness. It fundamentally changed both of us. After finally limping back to our campsite, more dead than alive, we managed to contact a bush pilot to come retrieve us within a couple of days. I'll never forget the look on that pilot's face when he landed on the gravel bar and saw two bloodied, dirt-caked skeletons emerge from the forest. I don't think he believed our delirious tales of a towering man-beast deep in those woods that hunted men for sport. He chalked it up to a bear attack and hypothermia-induced hallucinations, but Silas and I knew the truth. We spent what felt like an eternity as playthings, trapped in that lightless cave by a creature whose evil surpassed any natural animal. No one could understand what we endured, how close we came to adding to the human remains littering its lair. If not for our final, desperate escape that summer, instilled a weariness of the darkness I've never fully shaken. To this day, I still sleep with a nightlight because of the vivid memories of that lightless cave. Claustrophobia kept me from ever scuba diving or spelunking with friends, and the paranoia of being watched from the woods persisted into my 20s until I finally sought counseling. But the experience also left me resilient to life's everyday struggles. After staring down a living nightmare like I did at 15, most problems seemed trivial in comparison. I truly believe surviving that prepared me for emotional hardships to come, like grieving Silas's death from cancer last winter. He was my anchor, the man who taught me unimaginable courage in the face of darkness. But even after his death, a chilling realization slowly settled over me. Silas was never truly the same after Alaska. Yes, he was scarred, haunted by the experience, but there was also that unnerving calm, that peculiar emptiness in his eyes that only deepened with the years. He'd sometimes stare blankly into the forest behind our home, whispering about ancient ones or the old earth, as if still in communion with something unseen. His cancer, when it came, was aggressive, consuming him from the inside out, a decay that felt less like illness and more like a slow, internal dissolution. Sometimes in his final days, when I leaned close, I thought I caught a faint, strange scent clinging to him, like cold earth and iron, the very smell of that creature's lair. At 60 now, my daily routine is tame compared to my former life. I'm quite content puttering around the house and tending my garden these days. But some wild part of my spirit will always remain 17, crouched by a flickering campfire deep in those Alaskan woods, ready to battle monsters. Because I know now such evil does lurk in forgotten places, and sometimes it doesn't just kill you, it changes you. It leaves a mark, a silent knowing, a subtle shift in the soul that proves you were touched by something ancient and malevolent. Something that might have let you go not because it was merciful, but because it had already taken what it needed. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.